Welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe for the best Reddit creepypasta stories, perfect for bedtime chills. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the story. Posted by You Haunted by Fear 8 hours ago. I always thought Ouija boards were a joke. I mean, come on, a bunch of letters on a piece of wood and suddenly you're talking to spirits? It sounded like something out of a bad horror movie. But that was before last Saturday night. My friends, Jess, Mike and I were hanging out at my place. We were bored, flipping through channels, and nothing interesting was on. Jess, always the thrill seeker, suggested we try something different. She pulled out an old Ouija board from her bag. "Where did you get that?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Found it at a yard sale. Thought it could be fun," she replied with a mischievous grin. I hesitated, but Mike was all in. "Let's do it. What's the worst that could happen?" So we dimmed the lights, lit a few candles, and sat in a circle around the board. Jess explained the rules and placed her fingers on the planchette. Mike and I followed suit, still skeptical but curious. "Is there anyone here with us?" Jess asked, her voice trembling slightly. For a few moments, nothing happened. I was about to make a joke when the planchette started to move. At first, I thought one of them was pushing it, but then it started moving faster and with more force than any of us could muster. It spelled out YES. I laughed nervously. "Okay, who's messing around?" But Jess and Mike looked as freaked out as I felt. "It's not us," Mike said, his eyes wide. "Who are you?" Jess asked. The planchette moved again, spelling out MICHAEL. Mike paled. "That's my name. Do you know us?" I asked, my voice shaky. The planchette moved to yes again. "What do you want?" Jess asked. The response came quickly. FRIEND. We all exchanged nervous glances. "This is too weird," I muttered. "Let's stop." But before we could move the planchette to goodbye, it started moving on its own, spelling out DANGER. "Okay, that's enough," Mike said, pulling his fingers away. Jess and I did the same, but the planchette kept moving. CRUCIFIED. My blood ran cold. "What the hell does that mean?" Jess whispered. The planchette stopped. We all sat in stunned silence for a moment before Mike broke it. "This is stupid. It's just a game." But it didn't feel like a game anymore. We packed up the board and tried to shake off the unease. But the rest of the night was tense and awkward. Eventually they left and I went to bed, trying to convince myself it was all a prank. That night I had the most vivid, terrifying dream. I was in a dark, foggy forest. I could hear whispers all around me, but I couldn't see anyone. I started to run, but the fog grew thicker and the whispers turned into screams. Suddenly, I tripped and fell into a clearing. There, in the center, was a wooden cross. I was dragged towards it by unseen forces, my body pinned to the wood. I screamed, struggling against the invisible bonds, but it was no use. Nails appeared out of nowhere, driving into my hands and feet. The pain was excruciating. Blood poured from the wounds, soaking the ground beneath me. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The pain had felt so real. I looked at my hands and feet, half expecting to see the wounds, but they were unmarked. I tried to shake it off as just a nightmare, but I couldn't get the image out of my head. The next morning, I told Jess and Mike about the dream. They looked as freaked out as I felt. "We need to get rid of that board," Mike said. "It's cursed or something," Jess agreed. "I'll take it back to the yard sale. Maybe they'll take it back." But when she went to the address, the house was abandoned. There was no sign of the yard sale or the people who had sold her the board. It was like they had vanished into thin air. As the days passed, strange things started happening. I'd hear whispers in my apartment, and objects would move on their own. I started having the same nightmare every night. Each time, the pain felt more real, more intense. One night, I woke up to find scratches on my arms. Deep, angry red marks that hadn't been there when I went to bed. I knew then that whatever we had contacted with that Ouija board wasn't going to leave us alone. I started researching Ouija boards, looking for answers. I found stories of people who had been haunted, tormented, even killed by malevolent spirits they had contacted. But none of the stories were as specific or as terrifying as mine. The word crucified kept echoing in my mind. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it wasn't good. The nightmares, the whispers, the scratches, they were all leading up to something terrible. Posted by You Haunted by Fear 6 hours ago. Hey everyone, thanks for all the support on my last post. The situation has gotten even worse, and I'm honestly terrified. Here's what happened next. After that first nightmare and the scratches, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I started keeping all the lights on in my apartment, and I even borrowed Mike's old baseball bat to keep by my bed. But no matter what I did, the whispers and strange occurrences continued. Jess and Mike were worried too. Jess suggested we find a medium or someone who could help us figure out what was going on. I was skeptical, but at this point I was willing to try anything. We found a woman named Mrs. Green who had a reputation for dealing with supernatural issues. Her house was filled with crystals, candles, and strange herbs. She listened patiently as we told her about the Ouija board and my nightmares. She nodded thoughtfully. "The board has opened a gateway," she said. "You've invited something dark into your lives. Can you help us?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I can try," she replied. "But you need to be prepared. This won't be easy." Mrs. Green suggested a cleansing ritual and advised us to bring the board to her house. When Jess retrieved it from her place, she noticed that the planchette had moved on its own, now resting on the letter C. She tried to ignore the chill that ran down her spine as she drove to Mrs. Green's house. We gathered in Mrs. Green's living room that evening. The air was thick with the scent of burning sage. Mrs. Green placed the board on a small table and surrounded it with candles. She instructed us to hold hands and close our eyes while she chanted in a language I didn't recognize. The room grew colder, and I felt a heavy presence pressing down on us. The candles flickered, and the planchette began to move on its own. It spelled out STOP. Mrs. Green's chanting grew louder, more urgent. The planchette started to move faster, spelling out CRUCIFIED. I felt a sharp pain in my chest and screamed, clutching at my shirt. When I pulled my hand away, there was a bloody scratch across my heart. "We need to stop," I shouted, tears streaming down my face. Mrs. Green ignored me, continuing her chant. The candles blew out, plunging the room into darkness. I felt something cold and clammy wrap around my neck, squeezing tighter and tighter. I couldn't breathe. Jess and Mike were shouting, but their voices sounded distant, like they were miles away. Just when I thought I was going to pass out, the grip loosened, and I gasped for air. Mrs. Green had stopped chanting, and the room was silent. The planchette had stopped moving, resting on goodbye. Mrs. Green turned on the lights, and we all looked at each other, shaken. "It's not over," she said quietly. "The spirit is still here. It's tied to you now." "What do we do?" Jess asked, her voice trembling. "I need to do more research," Mrs. Green replied. "In the meantime, keep the board with you. Do not let it out of your sight." I wanted to argue, to leave the board with her, but something told me that would only make things worse. We thanked Mrs. Green and left, the board feeling like a ticking time bomb in my hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cross from my dreams. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. I could hear them calling my name, taunting me. My entire body ached and I felt like I was losing my mind. Around 3 a.m, I heard a loud bang from the living room. I grabbed the baseball bat and crept out of my bedroom, my heart pounding. The board was lying in the middle of the floor, the planchette moving on its own. It spelled out YOUARENEXT. I dropped the bat and ran to my phone, calling Jess and Mike. "It's happening again," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I need you guys to come over, now." They arrived within minutes, and we sat in the living room, staring at the board. "We can't keep doing this," Mike said. "It's driving us all insane." Jess nodded. "We need to find out who this spirit is and what it wants." I agreed, but I didn't know where to start. Mrs. Green had mentioned something about the spirit being tied to me. I started digging through old family records, hoping to find a clue. That's when I found it, an old family diary, tucked away in a box of my grandmother's belongings. The entries were faded, but one passage stood out. June 15th, 1942. We've done something terrible. The ritual went wrong, and now we're cursed. The spirit of Michael haunts us. He was innocent, and we crucified him. Now he wants revenge. He'll come for us, one by one. My hands shook as I read the words. This wasn't just any spirit. It was a family curse, and I was the next target. Posted by You Haunted by Fear 4 hours ago. Hey everyone, I'm back with an update. Thank you all for the advice and support. Things have taken a darker turn, and I need to share what happened next. After finding my grandmother's diary and reading about the family curse, I was more terrified than ever. I showed the entry to Jess and Mike, and they were just as freaked out. So this Michael guy was crucified by your ancestors? Mike asked, trying to make sense of it all. Looks like it, I replied, my voice shaking. And now he wants revenge. We need to break the curse, Jess said firmly. There has to be a way. We decided to visit the local library to dig up more information. We pored over old newspapers, family records, and anything that might give us a clue. After hours of searching, we found an article from the 1940s about a man named Michael Thompson who had been accused of witchcraft and brutally executed by a group of townspeople. The details matched the diary entry. Michael Thompson was innocent, but the townspeople, including my great-grandfather, had accused him of dark magic and crucified him as a warning to others. It was a horrific, unjust act that had cursed my family for generations. How do we break this curse? I asked, feeling hopeless. We need to find a way to appease his spirit, Jess said. Maybe there's a ritual or something we can do. We took our findings back to Mrs. Green. She read through the articles and the diary, her face growing more serious with each page. This is a powerful curse, she said. To break it, you need to confront Michael's spirit and seek his forgiveness. It won't be easy. How do we do that? I asked, dreading the answer. You need to go back to where it all started, Mrs. Green replied. Find the place where he was crucified and perform a cleansing ritual. You'll need to bring offerings and ask for his forgiveness. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. The thought of confronting the spirit in the place where he had been brutally murdered was terrifying, but I knew we had no choice. We gathered the necessary items: candles, sage, a bowl of salt, and a bottle of holy water. Mrs. Green gave us a small vial of anointing oil and instructed us on the ritual. We would need to draw a protective circle, light the candles, and chant a specific incantation to summon Michael's spirit. The location of the crucifixion was an old, abandoned church on the outskirts of town. It had been left to decay for decades, its walls crumbling and overgrown with ivy. We arrived just as the sun was setting, casting eerie shadows over the ruined building. The air was thick with tension as we stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under our weight, and I could almost hear the echoes of past horrors. We found the spot described in the diary, marked by a faint stain on the floorboards where Michael had died. We set up the ritual, placing the candles in a circle and sprinkling salt around us for protection. The air grew colder, and I felt a chill run down my spine. We lit the candles and began the chant Mrs. Green had taught us. As we chanted, the temperature dropped further and the candles flickered. I could feel a presence in the room, watching us. The planchette from the Ouija board, which we had brought along, started to move on its own, spelling out RELEASEME. We're trying, I whispered, my breath visible in the freezing air. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the church, extinguishing the candles. The planchette flew off the board, and I felt an icy hand grip my shoulder. I turned to see a shadowy figure standing behind me, its eyes glowing with an unearthly light. Please, forgive us, I pleaded, tears streaming down my face. We didn't know. We're sorry for what happened to you. The figure loomed closer, and I felt a crushing weight on my chest. I couldn't breathe. Jess and Mike continued the chant, their voices shaking with fear. The figure raised its hand, and I felt searing pain in my palms and feet, as if nails were being driven into them. I screamed, collapsing to the floor. The shadowy figure hovered over me, its expression unreadable. In a desperate act, Jess grabbed the vial of anointing oil and threw it at the figure. The oil splashed across the shadow, and it recoiled with a guttural scream. The pressure on my chest lifted, and I gasped for air. "Keep chanting!" Jess shouted, her voice breaking. We resumed the chant, our voices growing stronger with each word. The figure writhed in agony, its form flickering like a dying flame. Finally, with one last scream, it vanished, leaving us in stunned silence. The candles reignited on their own, casting a warm glow over the room. The oppressive chill lifted, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. "Did we do it?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," I replied, still trembling. We gathered our things and left the church, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I didn't know if the curse was truly broken, but for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. That night, I slept without nightmares. The whispers were gone, and the scratches had started to heal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. Michael's spirit had been appeased, but the horrors we had unleashed weren't so easily forgotten. Posted by You Haunted by Fear, 2 hours ago. Hey everyone, I'm back with another update. Thanks for sticking with me through this. I thought things were getting better, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Here's what happened next. After the ritual at the abandoned church, we all felt a bit more at ease. The nightmares stopped, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Jess and Mike were cautiously optimistic, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only scratched the surface of something much darker. A few days later, I received a call from Mrs. Green. Her voice was tense, and she asked me to come over immediately. I didn't hesitate. When I arrived, she looked more serious than I'd ever seen her. "We need to talk," she said, motioning for me to sit down. "What's wrong?" I asked, my anxiety spiking again. "I've been doing some more research on your family's history," she said, handing me a stack of old documents. "There's something you need to know." The documents were old court records and letters detailing the events leading up to Michael Thompson's execution. As I read through them, a horrifying pattern began to emerge. Michael wasn't the first innocent person my ancestors had accused and executed. There had been others, dozens of them, over the years. Each one had been accused of witchcraft or dark magic, and each one had been brutally killed. "This isn't just a curse," Mrs. Green said quietly. "It's a cycle of violence and vengeance that's been repeating for generations." My stomach churned as I realized the full extent of what she was saying. My family had a long history of persecuting innocent people, and their spirits were seeking revenge. Michael Thompson's spirit was just one of many. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to break the cycle," Mrs. Green replied, "but it's going to be dangerous. We need to perform a ritual to release all the spirits and put an end to this once and for all." Jess and Mike were on board immediately, though I could see the fear in their eyes. We gathered at my apartment that night, bringing everything Mrs. Green had instructed us to: candles, sage, anointing oil, and a new Ouija board. This time, it wasn't just about contacting Michael. It was about reaching out to all the spirits my family had wronged. We set up the ritual in my living room, creating a large protective circle with salt and placing the candles at each point. Mrs. Green led us in a chant, calling out to the spirits and asking for their forgiveness. As we chanted, the air grew cold and the room darkened. Shadows flickered along the walls, and I could feel a heavy presence all around us. The Ouija board's planchette started to move, faster and more violently than before. It spelled out FREEUS. "We're trying," Mrs. Green said, her voice steady. "But you need to help us. Show us how to break the cycle." The planchette moved again, spelling out CRUCIFIED. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, and I knew what we had to do. "We need to confront them," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to go to the site of the crucifixions and perform the ritual there." The others nodded, and we gathered our things, heading back to the abandoned church. The night was dark and foreboding, and as we approached the church, I could feel the weight of the spirits pressing down on us. Inside, we set up the ritual again, this time in the exact spot where Michael had been crucified. The air was thick with tension, and I could hear whispers all around us. Mrs. Green led us in the chant, and the candles flickered wildly. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I saw the shadowy figure of Michael Thompson appear before us. His eyes glowed with an eerie light, and behind him, I could see the faint outlines of other figures, other spirits, all seeking justice. "Please," I said, my voice trembling. "We're sorry for what our ancestors did. We want to make it right. Please, show us how to free you." Michael's spirit stepped forward, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. He raised his hand, pointing to the ground. In the dirt, I could see faint lines forming a symbol, a cross with a circle around it. Mrs. Green nodded, understanding what needed to be done. She took the anointing oil and traced the symbol in the dirt, chanting the incantation. As she finished, a blinding light filled the room, and I felt a surge of energy. The spirits began to fade, their forms dissipating into the light. Michael's spirit lingered for a moment, his eyes locking onto mine. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, sadness, and finally, peace. He nodded once, and then he was gone. The light faded, and we were left standing in the dim, crumbling church. The oppressive weight was gone, and the air felt lighter. We had done it. The cycle was broken, and the spirits were free. We returned to Mrs. Green's house, exhausted but relieved. "It's over," she said, a small smile on her face. "You did it." That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. The nightmares were gone, and the whispers had fallen silent. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. But I knew that the memory of what had happened would stay with me forever. Posted by You Haunted by Fear 1 hour ago. Hey everyone, I'm back with what I hope is the final update. The past few weeks have been a nightmare, but I think we're finally free. Here's how it all ended. After the ritual at the abandoned church, things were quiet for a few days. No nightmares, no whispers, no strange occurrences. I started to believe that we had truly broken the curse. Jess, Mike, and I tried to get back to our normal lives, but it was hard to forget everything that had happened. Then, one night, I woke up to a feeling of intense cold. My breath fogged in the air, and I could hear a faint whisper. It wasn't the same chaotic, malevolent whisper from before. It was more focused, more desperate. I followed the sound to the living room, where the Ouija board we had used was lying on the coffee table. The planchette was moving on its own, slowly spelling out a single word, Forgive. A shiver ran down my spine. I had thought we had finished it all, but it seemed there was one last step. I knew I had to find a way to offer true forgiveness and closure to the spirits we had disturbed. I called Jess and Mike, explaining what had happened. They came over right away, and we gathered around the board. "We need to finish this," I said, my voice trembling. "We need to offer forgiveness and make sure they're at peace." We lit candles and formed a circle around the board. Mrs. Green had taught us a final ritual for offering forgiveness and peace to restless spirits. We began the chant, the air growing colder with each word. The planchette moved again, spelling out THANKYOU. A figure appeared in the room, Michael's spirit. This time, he didn't look angry or vengeful. His expression was calm, almost relieved. Behind him, the other spirits began to materialize, their faces no longer twisted in anger. "We forgive you," I said, my voice steady, "and we ask for your forgiveness as well." Michael nodded, and I felt a warmth spread through the room. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and calm. The spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air. As the last of the spirits disappeared, the candles blew out, leaving us in darkness. But this time, it didn't feel ominous or frightening. It felt like a release, a final letting go of the darkness that had haunted us. We sat in silence for a few moments, letting the reality of what had happened sink in. "Is it really over?" Jess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," I replied. "I hope so." The next few days were uneventful. No nightmares, no strange occurrences, nothing. It seemed like the spirits had finally found peace, and we could move on with our lives. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Mrs. Green. She wrote to say that she had continued her research and found evidence that the spirits we had contacted had indeed moved on. She also included a small charm, a protective amulet, to keep with me as a safeguard against any lingering dark forces. I wear the amulet every day, a reminder of the ordeal we went through and the importance of respecting forces beyond our understanding. Jess and Mike have also moved on, though we all stay in touch, bonded by the experience we shared. Looking back, it's hard to believe everything that happened. What started as a simple game with a Ouija board turned into a life-changing ordeal, but we faced the darkness and came out stronger on the other side. Thank you all for your support and encouragement throughout this journey. I couldn't have made it through without your advice and kind words. Stay safe, everyone, and remember, some things are best left undisturbed. It was a Friday night, and my friends Jake, Sarah, and I were bored out of our minds. We were supposed to go to a party, but it got cancelled last minute. So we decided to hang out at my place. Jake, ever the instigator, suggested we try something different. "How about a Ouija board?" he said with a mischievous grin. Sarah and I exchanged skeptical looks, but boredom and curiosity got the best of us. I remembered my grandmother had an old Ouija board stashed away in the attic. She used to warn me about playing with it, claiming it was dangerous. As a kid, I laughed it off, thinking she was just trying to keep me out of trouble. But now, it seemed like a fun idea. We dusted off the old board and set it up in the living room. The air was thick with anticipation and a hint of nervousness. We lit some candles to set the mood and sat around the board, our fingers lightly touching the planchette. "Is anyone there?" Jake called out, his voice tinged with mock seriousness. For a while, nothing happened. We exchanged glances, stifling giggles, but then the planchette started to move. At first, I thought Jake was pushing it, but his wide-eyed expression told me otherwise. It spelled out YES. A chill ran down my spine. We asked a few more questions, basic stuff like the spirit's name, how old it was, how it died. The answers were vague and unsettling, but then something changed. The air grew colder, and the candles flickered wildly. "Are you alone?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. The planchette shot to no. "Who is with you?" I asked, feeling a knot of fear tighten in my chest. The planchette spelled out DEATH. We all jerked our hands away from the board, breathing heavily. It felt like a bad joke gone too far, but there was something genuinely sinister in the air. "Let's stop," I said, my voice shaking. But Jake, ever the thrill-seeker, insisted we continue. "We have to see this through," he argued. "What if there's something it wants to tell us?" Reluctantly, we placed our fingers back on the planchette. "Where are you?" Jake asked. The planchette moved slowly this time, spelling out BASEMENT. My heart pounded in my chest. "We didn't have a basement." "We don't have a basement," Sarah said, her voice trembling. The planchette didn't move. We sat in silence, the weight of the message sinking in. Then, almost imperceptibly, the planchette began to move again, spelling out DIG. "Dig where?" I demanded, my fear giving way to frustration. The planchette spelled out BACKYARD. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. There was no way I was going to dig up my backyard because of a message from a Ouija board, but Jake was insistent. "Come on, it's probably nothing. Let's just check it out," he said, grabbing a flashlight and heading for the back door. Reluctantly, Sarah and I followed. The night was eerily silent as we stepped into the backyard. the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Jake grabbed a shovel from the shed and started digging in a random spot. At first, it was just dirt and rocks, but then the shovel hit something solid. We all leaned in, curiosity and fear mingling in our minds. Jake dug around the object, revealing a small, rusty box. He pried it open, and inside was an old, tarnished knife, stained with something dark. We all recoiled in horror. The realization hit us like a ton of bricks. This was no ordinary knife. It looked ancient, and the stains on it, they were unmistakably blood. "Jesus Christ, what is this?" Sarah whispered, her face pale. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. We should have stopped there, should have put the box back and walked away. But Jake, driven by some morbid curiosity, picked up the knife. As soon as he touched it, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. It wasn't from any of us. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We dropped everything and ran back inside, slamming the door behind us. We stood there, panting and shaking, our minds reeling from what had just happened. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, my voice a mix of fear and anger. "I don't know," Jake said, his bravado completely gone. "But I think we need to call the police." "No way," Sarah said. "We tell them we found a knife because a Ouija board told us to. They'll think we're crazy." But deep down, I knew Sarah was right. We were in over our heads, and there was no easy way out. The weight of what we'd uncovered pressed down on us, a dark, suffocating presence that wouldn't let go. That night, none of us slept. We stayed up, huddled together in the living room, too scared to leave each other's sides. Every creak, every gust of wind made us jump, and in the back of my mind, I kept hearing the planchette's final message, DEATH. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of sirens. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. Jake and Sarah were already awake, their faces pale and drawn. "We have to get rid of it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We have to put it back." Jake nodded, but it was too late. The police were already at our door. Someone had reported the scream, and now they were here to investigate. We had no choice but to show them the knife. As soon as they saw it, their expressions changed. They took it from us, carefully placing it in an evidence bag. We were questioned for hours, but we stuck to our story. We had found it while digging in the backyard. We left out the part about the Ouija board. Days turned into weeks, and the police investigation intensified. They discovered that the knife was linked to a series of unsolved murders from decades ago. It was the murder weapon they had been searching for all along. The case had gone cold, but now, with this new evidence, they were reopening it. My friends and I tried to go back to our normal lives, but we were forever changed. The nightmares started soon after the police took the knife. Dark, twisted dreams that left me waking up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. And in every dream, I saw the same thing, a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed, holding the knife. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had unleashed something terrible, something that couldn't be undone. The Ouija board's messages haunted me, and the weight of our actions pressed down on me like a lead blanket. We had dug up more than just a knife that night. We had unearthed a darkness that refused to let go. And as much as I wanted to believe it was just a game, deep down, I knew the truth. The Ouija board had led us to the murder weapon, and now it seemed the murder weapon was leading something, or someone, straight to us. I tried to move on with my life, but the sense of dread never left me. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every creak of the house made my heart race. I began to see things out of the corner of my eye. A dark figure standing in the corner, disappearing when I turned to look. It wasn't just me. Sarah and Jake also experienced strange occurrences. Sarah's cat started hissing at empty spaces, its fur standing on end. Jake's car alarm would go off randomly in the middle of the night, with no sign of tampering. We were all on edge, unable to escape the feeling that something was watching us. One night, about a week after we found the knife, I was home alone. My parents were out of town, and the silence in the house was deafening. I tried to distract myself with TV, but the unease gnawed at me. Eventually, I decided to go to bed early, hoping sleep would bring some relief. I woke up to a loud crash downstairs. My heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed my phone and crept down the stairs, my hands trembling. When I reached the bottom, I saw the front door was wide open, swinging slightly in the night breeze. The living room was a mess, books and picture frames scattered across the floor. The coffee table overturned. I called Jake and Sarah, my voice shaking as I told them what had happened. They came over immediately, but by the time they arrived, there was no sign of an intruder. We searched the house from top to bottom, but everything was locked and nothing seemed to be missing. Maybe it was just a burglar, Jake suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. But deep down, we all knew there was something more sinister at play. The disturbances continued to escalate. Sarah's cat went missing one night, only to reappear a few days later, covered in scratches and visibly shaken. Jake started waking up with unexplained bruises on his arms and legs, as if someone had grabbed him in his sleep. The nightmares grew worse. I dreamed of the shadowy figure every night, standing at the foot of my bed, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. It would whisper my name, its voice a raspy hiss that sent shivers down my spine. I would wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that it had been real. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront whatever was haunting us. I set up the Ouija board again, this time alone. I lit the candles and placed the planchette in the center, my hands shaking as I called out. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The planchette moved slowly at first, then more deliberately, spelling out YOUKNOW. "What do you want?" I demanded, my fear giving way to frustration. DEATH. The word sent a chill down my spine. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Why are you haunting us?" There was a long pause, and then the planchette began to move again. NOTHAUNTING. I frowned, trying to make sense of the message. "Then what are you doing?" The response came quickly this time. FOLLOWING. "Following who?" I asked, my voice shaking. "ME." I pulled my hands away from the board, my mind racing. What did it mean? Following me. My friends and I had been experiencing the same disturbances. How could it be following just me? I didn't have time to ponder the question. The air grew cold, and the candles flickered wildly. I heard a whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from behind me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and saw the shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing yellow. I screamed and ran out of the house, not stopping until I reached the end of the block. I called Jake and Sarah, my voice shaking as I told them what had happened. They came over immediately, and we sat in my car, too scared to go back inside. "We need to get rid of the board," Sarah said, her face pale. "It's the only way to stop this." But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that easy. The darkness we had unleashed was already too powerful, too malevolent, and it wasn't going to let us go without a fight. We decided to destroy the Ouija board. It was a desperate move, but we were out of options. We took it to a secluded spot in the woods, far from any prying eyes, and set it on fire. As the flames consumed the board, I felt a brief moment of relief, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of foreboding. That night, I dreamed of the shadowy figure again. This time, it wasn't alone. There were others with it, their eyes glowing in the darkness, their whispers filling the air. They surrounded me, their voices merging into a cacophony of hisses and snarls. "Why won't you leave us alone?" I screamed in the dream, my voice echoing in the void. "YOUKNOW," they whispered in unison, their eyes boring into mine. I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat. The room was dark and silent, but the sense of dread lingered. I knew we had only scratched the surface of whatever we had unleashed, and it wasn't going to let us go without a fight. Over the next few days, the disturbances grew worse. Objects would move on their own, lights would flicker, and we would hear whispers in the dead of night. We were all on edge, barely able to function. One evening, as we were trying to make sense of it all, Sarah suggested we do some research. We dug through old newspaper archives, looking for any mention of the murders the knife was linked to. What we found sent chills down our spines. The knife was connected to a series of ritualistic killings that had taken place in our town over 50 years ago. The victims were all young, and their deaths were gruesome. The killer was never caught, but there were rumours of dark rituals and a cult that worshipped a malevolent entity. As we read through the articles, a pattern emerged. The killings had all occurred around the same time of year, and each victim had been found with a symbol carved into their flesh. The symbol matched the one on the knife. "We need to find out more about this cult," Jake said, his face pale. "Maybe it has something to do with what's happening to us." We spent hours digging through online forums and obscure books, piecing together the history of the cult. They called themselves the Followers of the Shadow, and their goal was to summon a powerful entity they referred to as the Harbinger. The more we learned, the more terrified we became. The rituals involved human sacrifices, and the knife was a key component. It was believed to hold the power to open a gateway between our world and the realm of the Harbinger. "We need to find a way to close the gateway," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Maybe that's why this thing is following us." But we had no idea how to do that. The rituals were complex and shrouded in mystery, and we were in way over our heads. The more we dug, the more we realized how dangerous this entity was. The disturbances continued to escalate. One night, I woke up to find my bedroom door wide open, even though I was sure I had locked it. I heard whispers coming from the hallway, faint but unmistakable. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my hands shaking as I crept out of bed. The whispers grew louder as I approached the stairs. I took a deep breath and descended, the light casting eerie shadows on the walls. When I reached the bottom, I saw the front door was open, just like that first night. The living room was a mess, with furniture overturned and objects scattered across the floor. And in the centre of the room stood the shadowy figure, its eyes glowing yellow. It held the knife in its hand, the blade dripping with blood. I froze, unable to move, my mind screaming at me to run. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure tilted its head, its eyes narrowing. "YOUKNOW," it hissed. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The knife, the murders, the cult, it was all connected, and somehow we had become a part of it. The entity wasn't just following us, it was using us. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want from us?" I asked, my voice shaking. The figure took a step forward, its eyes fixed on mine. "SACRIFICE. The word echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the danger we were in. I ran back upstairs, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I called Jake and Sarah, my voice trembling as I told them what had happened. "We need to find a way to stop this," Jake said, his voice urgent. "If it's after a sacrifice, we need to figure out how to protect ourselves." We spent the next few days trying to piece together a plan. We consulted every source we could find, looking for a way to break the connection between us and the entity. But the more we learned, the more hopeless it seemed. The rituals were ancient and complex, and there was no clear way to reverse them. One night, as we were poring over old texts and online forums, Sarah found something that gave us a glimmer of hope. There was a mention of a ritual that could banish the Harbinger back to its realm, but it required a specific set of ingredients and precise execution. "We have to try it," Sarah said, her voice determined. "It's our only chance." We gathered the ingredients, most of which were obscure and difficult to find. We spent hours preparing, making sure everything was perfect. The ritual had to be performed at midnight, in the same spot where we had found the knife. As the clock struck 12, we stood in a circle in the backyard, holding hands and reciting the incantation. The air grew cold, and a sense of foreboding washed over us, but we pressed on, determined to see it through. The ground beneath us began to tremble, and a low growl filled the air. Shadows seemed to writhe and twist around us, and I felt a cold hand brush against my cheek. But we didn't stop. We continued the ritual, our voices growing louder and more desperate. Suddenly, A blinding light erupted from the ground, and a deafening roar filled the air. The shadows recoiled, and the cold hand disappeared. We held on, our voices trembling but unwavering. And then, as quickly as it had started, it was over. The light faded, and the growl subsided. We stood there, panting and trembling, unsure if we had succeeded. "Did it work?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before we could answer, a cold wind swept through the backyard, extinguishing the candles. We looked around, our hearts pounding, but there was no sign of the shadowy figure. "I think we did it," Sarah said, her voice filled with cautious hope. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The sense of dread still lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Days turned into weeks, and the disturbances gradually subsided. We tried to move on with our lives, but the events of that night left a permanent mark on us. We were always on edge, always looking over our shoulders. One evening, I was home alone again, trying to relax with a movie. The house was quiet, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. But that peace was shattered when I heard a faint whisper. "Yo, UKNOW!" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. I grabbed my phone and called Jake and Sarah, my voice trembling as I told them what was happening. "We need to finish this," Jake said, his voice filled with determination. "We need to face it once and for all." We met at my house, armed with whatever weapons we could find. Knives, baseball bats, anything that could offer some semblance of protection. We set up the Ouija board one last time, determined to confront the entity and end this nightmare. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice filled with anger and fear. The planchette moved slowly, deliberately. "YOUKNOW. What do you want?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "SACRIFICE. "We won't let you take us," Jake said, his voice firm. "We will fight you." The planchette moved rapidly, spelling out a single word, TRY. The air grew cold, and the candles flickered wildly. A shadowy figure appeared before us, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. It moved towards us, the knife in its hand. We stood our ground, our hearts pounding in our chests. The figure stopped in front of us, its eyes fixed on mine. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, but I didn't back down. "You won't take us," I said, my voice shaking but defiant. "We won't let you." The figure let out a low growl, its eyes narrowing. And then, without warning, it lunged at us. We fought back with everything we had, swinging our weapons and shouting in defiance. The battle was fierce and terrifying, but we refused to give in. In the chaos, I grabbed the knife from the figure's hand and plunged it into the ground. A blinding light erupted from the earth, and a deafening roar filled the air. The figure let out a scream of rage and pain, and then it was gone. We stood there, panting and trembling, unsure if we had truly defeated it. But the sense of dread slowly lifted, and the air grew warm again. We had done it. We had faced our fears and emerged victorious. The following days were a blur of relief and exhaustion. We were finally free from the entity's grasp, and the disturbances ceased entirely. We tried to move on with our lives, but the memories of that night would always haunt us. We had uncovered a darkness that refused to let go, and we had fought back with everything we had. And though the scars would remain, we had triumphed over the shadows. But even now, sometimes in the dead of night, I hear a faint whisper, a chilling reminder of the entity that once haunted us. "Yo, UKNOW,